Millionaire invited his ugly secretary to dinner, but froze when she arrived looking like a goddess. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. The elevator hummed its familiar tune as it climbed to the 42nd floor, carrying Clara Johnson toward another day of deliberate invisibility. She adjusted her oversized glasses and smoothed down her hair, already twisted into the same tight bun she'd worn for the past 3 years. Her charcoal blazer hung loose over a simple white blouse, chosen specifically to blend into the corporate beige of Walker Industries. Most people would call her plain. Clara preferred the word strategic. The elevator dinged, and she stepped into the pristine marble lobby of the executive floor. Her low heels clicked softly against the polished surface as she made her way to her desk, a modest station positioned just outside the glass-walled office of Alexander Walker, CEO and heir to a business empire that spanned 3 continents. "Morning, Clara." The greeting came from Jennifer, the marketing director, who barely glanced up from her phone. "Good morning," Clara replied, her voice measured and professional. She'd perfected this tone, pleasant enough to avoid rudeness, forgettable enough to avoid attention. As she settled into her chair and powered up her computer, Clara caught a glimpse of herself in the dark monitor screen. 26 years old, honey-brown skin that she kept deliberately makeup-free, full lips pressed into a neutral line, and intelligent dark eyes hidden behind lenses that were probably 2 sizes too large. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Sometimes the smartest thing a woman can do is let them underestimate her, baby girl." The office began to fill with the usual morning chaos. Executives rushed past her desk, discussing quarterly reports and merger possibilities, treating her like part of the furniture. She preferred it that way. From her position, she could observe everything while revealing nothing about herself. At exactly 8:30 a.m., Alexander Walker emerged from the private elevator that led directly to his penthouse office. Clara didn't look up immediately, but she felt the familiar shift in the room's energy. Conversations became more hushed, postures straightened, and the air seemed to crackle with the kind of authority that money and power commanded. He was imposing without trying to be, 6 feet 3 inches of tailored perfection, with dark hair that probably cost more to maintain than Clara made in a month. His steel-grey eyes missed nothing, and his jaw was set in the permanent line of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Today he wore a navy suit that fit him like it had been sculpted rather than sewn, paired with a crisp white shirt and a tie the color of old money. "Ms. Johnson." His voice was deep, clipped and utterly impersonal as he paused at her desk. "I need the Morrison files on my desk in 10 minutes and reschedule my lunch with the board. Something's come up." "Of course, Mr. Walker." She kept her eyes on her computer screen, fingers already flying across the keyboard. "Would you prefer the lunch moved to tomorrow at 1, or would Thursday work better with your schedule?" "Thursday." He was already walking away, speaking over his shoulder. "And call my attorney. Tell him the Singapore deal needs to be expedited." Clara made the necessary notes, sent the required emails, and had the Morrison files perfectly organized on his desk within 8 minutes. Through the glass wall of his office, she could see him on the phone, one hand running through his hair, in what she'd learned was his tell for frustration. His jaw was tighter than usual, and there was a tension in his shoulders that suggested the Singapore deal wasn't going as smoothly as expected. She'd been watching Alexander Walker for 3 years, learning his patterns, his moods, his preferences. Not out of romantic interest, she'd never been foolish enough to develop feelings for a man who looked through her like she was made of glass. But understanding him made her job easier, and job security was everything to a woman who'd grown up with none. Her phone buzzed with a text from her younger brother. "Rent's due Friday. You good for your half?" Clara glanced at her bank balance on her phone screen and felt the familiar knot in her stomach. Between her portion of the rent for the small 2-bedroom apartment they shared in Queens, her student loan payments, and helping their mother with medical bills, her paycheck disappeared faster than morning dew. But Damon was in his senior year of college, and she'd be damned if she'd let him drop out for money when he was so close to his engineering degree. "Yeah, I've got it," she typed back, then immediately opened her banking app to transfer money from her savings that were getting dangerously thin. "Ms. Johnson." Alexander's voice cut through her financial anxiety. He was standing in his doorway, looking irritated. "The Morrison client called. Apparently there's an error in the contract you prepared." Clara's spine straightened. She never made errors in contracts. "I'll pull the file and review it immediately, sir." "See that you do." This deal is worth $30 million. I can't afford mistakes. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Your mistakes. Clara bit the inside of her cheek to keep her expression neutral, but inside, irritation flared hot and bright. She'd been preparing Alexander's contracts for 3 years without a single error, but he was ready to assume this one was her fault before even investigating. She pulled up the Morrison file, cross-referenced it with the original terms, and within minutes found the discrepancy. The client had requested last-minute changes that weren't reflected in the contract Alexander had signed. Clara had sent him an email about the changes yesterday at 6 p.m., an email that was still sitting unread in his inbox. She printed out her email, highlighted the relevant sections, and walked into his office. Alexander was leaning back in his leather chair, speaking into his headset in rapid-fire sentences about market projections. Clara placed the printout on his desk and waited. When he finished his call, he glanced at the paper, then at her. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Was it embarrassment? "I see," he said slowly. "The client made last-minute changes." "Yes, sir. I sent notification yesterday evening, but I understand you had the charity gala to attend. Would you like me to prepare the revised contract now?" Alexander studied her face for a moment longer than usual, and Clara had the strangest sensation that he was actually seeing her. Not just the reliable secretary who handled his schedule, but her. His eyes lingered on her face in a way that made her pulse quicken unexpectedly. "Yes," he said finally. "And Ms. Johnson? Good catch." It wasn't an apology, but from Alexander Walker, it was acknowledgement. As Clara returned to her desk, she caught herself wondering what it would be like if he looked at her like that more often, like she was a person worth noticing. Then she shook her head and opened the Morrison file. Dangerous thoughts like those were exactly why she kept her hair in a bun and her dreams carefully locked away. After all, invisible women were safer women, even if, sometimes, safety felt an awful lot like disappearing. Clara has spent 3 years being deliberately invisible at work. Do you think she's protecting herself or limiting herself? 3 days later, Clara found herself staring at her computer screen at 7:30 p.m., the office floor eerily quiet, except for the distant hum of cleaning equipment. She rubbed her tired eyes beneath her glasses and stretched her neck, feeling the familiar ache from hours hunched over contract revisions. The Singapore deal had exploded into a maze of legal complications, and she'd spent the entire week coordinating between lawyers, translators, and Alexander's increasingly frustrated demands for updates. Her stomach growled, reminding her that the granola bar she'd grabbed at lunch was hardly sufficient fuel for a 14-hour workday. But Damon had texted earlier about needing help with his final project presentation, and their mother had called twice about changing insurance providers, responsibilities that would have to wait until she finished the quarterly expense reports that Alexander needed first thing tomorrow. "Still here, Ms. Johnson." Clara's fingers froze over the keyboard. She turned to find Alexander standing behind her, his tie loosened and the top button of his shirt undone. It was the most casual she'd ever seen him, and something about the sight made her pulse skip unexpectedly. "Just finishing the quarterly reports, Mr. Walker. They'll be ready for your morning review." He moved closer, and she caught a hint of his cologne, something expensive and woodsy that probably cost more than her monthly Metro card. "What time did you get in this morning?" 7:15, she answered automatically, then immediately regretted the honesty. It made her sound pathetically eager to please. Alexander frowned. "And you're still here at—" He glanced at his Rolex. 7:30. "That's over 12 hours, Ms. Johnson." Clara kept her expression neutral. "The Singapore contracts required extensive revision, and Mrs. Pemberton from accounting needed the quarterly summaries expedited for the board meeting. I wanted to ensure everything was perfect." "Mrs. Pemberton?" Alexander's jaw tightened. Did she happen to mention that her request wasn't actually due until next Friday? Heat flushed Clara's cheeks. She'd spent 6 hours on reports that weren't urgent, sacrificing her evening because she'd trusted another department's timeline without verifying it herself. No, sir." She made it sound immediate. "Lydia Pemberton has a habit of making her poor planning everyone else's emergency." Alexander's voice carried an edge of irritation, but surprisingly it didn't seem directed at Clara. "You shouldn't have to work 14-hour days because other people can't manage their schedules." Clara stared at him, genuinely surprised. In 3 years, Alexander had never shown concern for her work-life balance. She wasn't even sure he'd realized she had a life outside the office. "It's fine, really. I don't mind staying late when needed." "When needed, yes. When convenient for others? No. He paused, studying her face with that same intensity she'd noticed the other day. Have you eaten dinner? The question was so unexpected that Clara blinked. What? Dinner. Food. Have you had any since lunch? I had a granola bar. That's not dinner. Alexander glanced at his watch again, then seemed to make a decision. There's a corporate dinner tonight. The Meridian Industries merger celebration. I need someone there who actually understands the contract details in case questions arise. Clara felt her stomach drop. Corporate dinners were for executives, people who mattered, people who weren't her. Sir, I think perhaps one of the vice presidents would be more appropriate. The vice presidents didn't spend the last 3 days restructuring the merger terms. You did. His grey eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her feel suddenly exposed. I need someone competent, Ms. Johnson. Someone who won't smile and nod when they should be taking notes. The compliment, if that's what it was, sent an unexpected warmth through her chest, but the practical part of her brain immediately began calculating obstacles. I don't have appropriate attire for a corporate dinner, Mr. Walker, and I'd need time to— The dinner doesn't start until 9. That gives you time to go home and change. He pulled out his phone and began typing. I'll have a car pick you up at 8:30. The restaurant is Le Bernardin. Clara's eyes widened. Le Bernardin. She'd seen it featured in magazines, the kind of place where appetizers cost more than her weekly grocery budget. Mr. Walker, I really don't think— Ms. Johnson. His voice carried the tone he used for closing arguments. This isn't a social invitation, it's work. Essential work that requires your expertise. Will you be available? When he put it like that, what choice did she have? Yes, sir. Good. Alexander was already heading toward the elevator, then paused and looked back. And Ms. Johnson, don't overthink it. You've earned your place at that table more than half the people who'll be there. The elevator doors closed behind him, leaving Clara alone with her racing thoughts and the sudden realization that she had exactly 50 minutes to transform herself from invisible secretary to someone appropriate for the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan. She gathered her things with hands that trembled slightly, her mind spinning through her limited wardrobe options. The black dress she'd worn to her college graduation was probably her best bet, though it was 3 years old and definitely more job interview than corporate merger celebration. As she rode the elevator down to the lobby, Clara caught her reflection in the polished steel doors. For the first time in years, she really looked at herself, not the carefully constructed professional persona, but the woman underneath. Her grandmother's voice whispered again, "Sometimes the smartest thing a woman can do is let them underestimate her." But what happened when you were tired of being underestimated? What happened when someone finally offered you a seat at the table you'd been setting for 3 years? Clara stepped into the cool New York evening, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and something that felt dangerously like excitement. She had 50 minutes to decide who she wanted to be when she walked into that restaurant. For the first time in her adult life, invisible didn't feel like the safest option. The Blacktown car would arrive in exactly 47 minutes, and Clara Johnson was about to discover that some invitations changed everything. Clara stood in front of her bedroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. The black dress, her only formal option, fit differently than she remembered. 3 years of rushed lunches and stress had carved subtle curves into her frame, and the fabric now hugged her body in ways that made her breath catch. She'd released her hair from its perpetual bun, letting her natural curls fall in soft waves past her shoulders. Without her oversized glasses, replaced by contacts she rarely wore, her dark eyes seemed larger, more expressive. Her hands shook as she applied lipstick, a deep burgundy she'd bought on impulse months ago and never had the courage to wear. The transformation was subtle yet profound, like watching a butterfly emerge from a cocoon she'd built around herself. "Damn, Clara." Her voice was barely a whisper in the small apartment. "Who are you?" Her phone buzzed. "Car arriving in 5 minutes." Panic fluttered in her chest. She grabbed her small black purse, the only one appropriate for such an occasion, and took one last look in the mirror. The woman looking back was confident, elegant, radiant. Everything Clara had convinced herself she wasn't. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt endless. When she stepped outside, a sleek black Mercedes waited at the curb. The driver, a distinguished man with kind eyes, opened the door for her. "Miss Johnson, I'm Byron, Mr. Walker's driver. You look lovely this evening." "Thank you," Clara murmured, settling into the leather seat that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Through the tinted windows, she watched familiar streets blur past, each mile taking her further from her comfort zone. 20 minutes later, Byron pulled up to Le Bernardin. The restaurant's understated elegance was exactly what Clara had expected, and exactly what intimidated her most. Soft lighting spilled onto the sidewalk, and well-dressed figures moved like shadows behind the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Mr. Walker asked me to escort you to the private dining room," Byron said gently, as if sensing her hesitation. Clara nodded, straightened her shoulders, and stepped out of the car. The moment her heels touched the pavement, she felt the shift. The way heads turned, conversations paused, eyes followed her movement. It was unsettling and thrilling in equal measure. Inside, the maitre d' led her through the main dining room toward a secluded area in the back. Clara was acutely aware of every step, every glance, every whispered conversation that seemed to pause as she passed. The private dining room housed 12 guests around a mahogany table set with crystal and silver that caught the candlelight like captured stars. Clara recognized several faces from business magazines and financial news programs, titans of industry whose decisions moved markets and shaped economies, but none of that registered the moment she saw Alexander. He stood near the far wall, wineglass in hand, deep in conversation with a silver-haired man she recognized as the CEO of Meridian Industries. Alexander was gesturing slightly as he spoke, his profile sharp against the warm lighting, completely at ease in a world of power and influence. Then he turned, and time seemed to suspend itself. Alexander's steel-grey eyes found hers across the room, and Clara watched his expression shift from polite attention to something raw and unguarded. His wineglass paused halfway to his lips. His conversation died mid-sentence. For several heartbeats they simply stared at each other across the elegant space. It was the CEO of Meridian who broke the spell, following Alexander's gaze and letting out a low whistle. "Well, Walker, you certainly know how to make an entrance. Who's the stunning woman?" Alexander seemed to remember how to breathe. He set down his wineglass and crossed the room with purposeful strides, never breaking eye contact with Clara. When he reached her, he stopped close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes. "Clara Johnson," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "My executive assistant." The pause before his description of her role didn't go unnoticed by the other guests, several of whom exchanged meaningful glances. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but forced herself to maintain composure. "Miss Johnson." Alexander's eyes traveled over her face with an intensity that made her pulse race. "You look—" He seemed to search for words, then settled on "professional." But the way he said it, with barely contained admiration, made "professional" sound like poetry. "Thank you, Mr. Walker." Clara was amazed. Her voice remained steady. "I hope I'm not overdressed for a business dinner." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first genuine smile she'd ever seen from him. "Not at all. In fact, I think you might be underdressed for how important you are to tonight's success." Before Clara could process the compliment, other guests began approaching. Alexander's hand settled lightly on her lower back, a gesture that sent electricity through her entire body as he guided her toward the group. "Gentlemen, allow me to introduce Clara Johnson, the woman responsible for restructuring the Meridian merger terms. Clara, this is Theodore Ashworth, CEO of Meridian Industries." Theodore, the silver-haired man, extended his hand with obvious appreciation. "Ms. Johnson, it's a pleasure. Alexander tells me you're the mastermind behind the contract revisions that saved us all considerable headaches." Clara shook his hand, acutely aware that every person in the room was studying her with new interest. "I simply ensured all parties' concerns were addressed, Mr. Ashworth. Mr. Walker's vision made the deal possible." "Modest and brilliant," murmured another executive, a woman with sharp eyes and perfectly coiffed auburn hair. "Where did you find her, Alexander?" "She found me," Alexander replied, and something in his tone made Clara glance at him sharply. 3 years ago. I'm just beginning to realize how fortunate that was." The evening progressed like a carefully choreographed dance. Clara found herself seated to Alexander's right, fielding questions about merger logistics with an expertise that impressed even her. But she was hyper-aware of Alexander's presence beside her, the way he listened intently when she spoke, how his fingers drummed against his wineglass when other men looked at her too long, the protective way he included her in every conversation. During the main course, Theodore leaned across the table. "Ms. Johnson, I have to ask, are you considering any career changes? Meridian could use someone with your analytical skills." The question hung in the air like challenge. Clara felt Alexander tense beside her, though he maintained his composure perfectly. "I'm very happy in my current position," Clara replied diplomatically. "Are you?" Theodore's eyes twinkled with mischief. Because a woman of your caliber shouldn't be hidden behind a desk, no matter how important that desk is. Clara caught the sharp look Alexander shot Theodore, but before anyone could respond, she smiled and said, "Sometimes the most powerful position is the one people underestimate." The table fell silent, then erupted in appreciative laughter. Alexander's eyes met hers, and in them she saw something new, respect, admiration, and something deeper that made her heart race. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Clara found herself standing beside Alexander, near the restaurant's entrance. The night air was cool against her skin, and the city lights blurred around them like a dream. "That was—" Alexander began, then stopped. "Clara, you were extraordinary tonight." She looked up at him, this powerful man who suddenly seemed vulnerable in the soft light spilling from the restaurant. "I was just being myself. That's what made it extraordinary." His voice was quiet, intimate. "I've been blind for 3 years, haven't I?" Clara felt something fundamental shift between them, a recognition that this night had changed everything. The careful professional distance they'd maintained was dissolving, replaced by something electric and dangerous and wonderful. "Maybe we both have been," she whispered. Alexander stepped closer, and Clara's breath caught. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her right there on the sidewalk, with all of Manhattan as witness. Instead, he reached up and gently tucked a curl behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Let me take you home," he said softly. And Clara realized that home might never mean the same thing again. The Mercedes glided through Manhattan's glittering streets, but the silence inside was anything but peaceful. Clara sat in the back seat beside Alexander, acutely aware of every breath he took, every subtle shift in his posture. The city lights painted moving shadows across his face, and she found herself studying his profile. The strong line of his jaw, the way his fingers drummed against his knee in a rhythm that matched her racing heartbeat. "Byron," Alexander's voice cut through the quiet, "take the scenic route, through Central Park." "Of course, sir," came the reply from the front seat. Clara turned to look at him, confused. Her queen's apartment was in the opposite direction. "Mr. Walker, I know where you live." His grey eyes met hers in the dim light. I'm not ready for this evening to end." The honesty in his voice made her chest tighten. This was uncharted territory for both of them, the careful professional boundaries they'd maintained for 3 years dissolving with each passing moment. As they entered Central Park, the city's chaos softened into something more intimate. Tree-lined paths curved ahead of them, lit by old-fashioned lampposts that cast pools of golden light on the empty road. "Tell me something," Alexander said, turning slightly to face her. "How long have you been hiding?" Clara's breath caught. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." His voice was gentle but insistent. "That woman in there tonight, brilliant, confident, commanding respect from men who've been in business longer than you've been alive, that's who you really are. So why have you spent 3 years pretending to be invisible?" Clara looked out the window, watching the dark expanse of the park roll past. The question cut deeper than she'd expected. "Because invisible women don't get hurt," she said quietly. "Hurt how?" She was quiet for so long that Alexander probably thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "When I was 22, fresh out of college, I got hired at a financial firm in downtown Brooklyn. Small company, but I was so excited. My first real job, decent pay, chance to prove myself." Clara's fingers twisted in her lap. "The senior partner took notice of me right away, said I was special, that he saw potential in me." Alexander's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. "For 6 months I thought I was advancing because of my skills. Late meetings, weekend projects, special assignments. I felt so proud, so chosen." Clara's laugh was hollow. "Then I found out he was having the same special meetings with 2 other young women in the office. When I confronted him, when I threatened to report him," she shrugged. "Suddenly my work wasn't good enough anymore. Suddenly I was making errors that needed correction. Within 2 months I was fired for performance issues." The Mercedes had stopped at a red light, but Alexander didn't seem to notice. His hands were clenched into fists on his knees. "Clara," he said, and her name sounded different in his voice, softer, more personal. "What happened to you was not your fault. I know that. Now." She finally met his eyes. "But it taught me something valuable. When you're remarkable, you become a target. When you're invisible, you're safe. And so you made yourself invisible." "I made myself strategic." Clara straightened, some of her natural fire returning. "I learned that I could be more effective working behind the scenes, that I could accomplish more when people underestimated me. I built walls that protected me while still allowing me to excel. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the passing streetlight. But walls that keep pain out also keep everything else out. The observation hit Clara like a physical blow. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Alexander said, reaching over to take her hand, that in protecting yourself from the wrong kind of attention, you may have also shut out the right kind. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, and Clara felt electricity shoot up her arm. The simple touch was more intimate than anything she'd experienced in years. What kind of attention is the right kind? She asked, though her voice came out breathier than intended. Alexander's eyes darkened. The kind that sees your brilliance and wants to celebrate it, not exploit it. The kind that recognizes your strength and wants to stand beside it, not diminish it. The kind that looks at you and thinks... He paused, seeming to wrestle with his words. The kind that thinks you're extraordinary, just as you are. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. Alexander, I know this complicates things, he said quickly. I know I'm your boss, and there are rules and professional boundaries and a dozen reasons why this is complicated. But Clara, what I felt tonight, what I've been feeling, it's not going away just because it's inconvenient. The car had stopped, and Clara realized they were outside her building in Queens. The modest brick apartment complex looked shabby compared to the luxury they'd just left, but Alexander didn't seem to notice the contrast. Byron cleared his throat softly. We've arrived, Miss Johnson. But neither Clara nor Alexander moved. They sat in the charged silence, hands still connected, the weight of unspoken possibilities hanging between them. I should go, Clara said finally, though she made no move toward the door. So you should, Alexander agreed, though his grip on her hand tightened slightly. My brother will be wondering where I am. Of course. And tomorrow is Thursday, the Hartwell presentation. Right. The presentation. Neither of them moved. Finally, Clara laughed, a soft, genuine sound that seemed to surprise them both. We're being ridiculous. Alexander's smile was rueful, completely ridiculous, but his eyes were warm, affectionate. Clara, can I ask you something? What? Tomorrow, when you come into the office, will you still be hiding? The question was loaded with meaning. Clara understood that he wasn't just asking about her appearance or her professional demeanor. He was asking if she was ready to step out from behind the walls she'd built, to risk being seen completely. I don't know, she answered honestly. This is all very new for me. For me too, Alexander admitted. But I meant what I said earlier. You've been hiding in plain sight for 3 years, and I've been too blind to see what was right in front of me. I don't want to be blind anymore. Clara looked up at her apartment building, then back at Alexander's earnest face. Something fundamental had shifted tonight, and there was no going back to the safe, invisible version of herself. Alexander, what happens now? Now, he said, reluctantly releasing her hand and reaching for the door handle. I walk you to your door like a gentleman. Tomorrow we figure out how to navigate whatever this is becoming, and somewhere in between, we both stop pretending that tonight didn't change everything. As they walked up the steps to her building, Clara felt the evening air cool against her skin and realized that she wasn't the same woman who had left this apartment 3 hours ago. That woman had been invisible by choice. This woman, the one walking beside Alexander Walker with her heart pounding and her future suddenly full of terrifying possibilities, this woman was about to learn what it meant to be truly seen. And despite her fears, despite the complications, despite everything logical that told her to retreat back into safety, Clara Johnson was ready to find out who she could become when she finally stepped into the light. Thank you, she said as they reached her door, for tonight, for seeing me. Alexander's smile was soft, genuine. Thank you for letting me. As his footsteps faded down the hallway, Clara leaned against her door and wondered if some transformations were irreversible. She was about to find out. Clara stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror at 6:30 a.m., her hands trembling as she reached for her hair tie. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the invisible secretary who had inhabited this same space yesterday morning. Even without makeup, even in her simple cotton pajamas, there was something different in her eyes, a spark that hadn't been there before. She twisted her hair into the familiar bun, then stopped. Alexander's words echoed in her memory. Tomorrow, when you come into the office, will you still be hiding? Clara released her hair, letting the soft curls fall around her shoulders. Her hands shook as she applied a touch of mascara and the burgundy lipstick from last night. When she slipped on her contact lenses instead of her oversized glasses, the transformation was subtle but unmistakable. In her bedroom, she bypassed her usual shapeless blazers and selected a fitted navy dress she'd bought 6 months ago but never worn. It was still professional, still appropriate, but it actually fit her body instead of hiding it. Her phone buzzed with a text from Damon. "Sis, whatever happened last night, you're humming. You never hum before coffee." Clara paused, realizing she had indeed been humming unconsciously. When had she started doing that? The subway ride to Manhattan felt different too. She found herself making eye contact with other passengers, offering small smiles to the woman reading beside her, even helping an elderly man with his heavy grocery bag. It was as if stepping out of her invisible shell had made the entire world more vivid. But as the elevator climbed toward the 42nd floor, familiar anxiety began creeping in. What if last night had been some sort of temporary madness? What if Alexander regretted everything he'd said? What if she'd misread the entire situation and was about to make a fool of herself? The elevator doors opened and Clara stepped into the executive floor with her heart pounding. "Oh my God, Clara!" The exclamation came from Dalia Martinez, one of the junior executives who had always been friendly but distant. Now she was staring at Clara with undisguised amazement. "You look... wow. Did you do something different with your hair?" Before Clara could respond, more heads turned. Conversations paused. The same attention that had terrified her for 3 years suddenly felt manageable, different. "Just trying something new," Clara replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. She made her way to her desk, acutely aware of the curious glances following her movement. But instead of shrinking under the attention, she found herself walking taller, moving with more confidence. At exactly 8:30 a.m., the private elevator dinged, and Alexander stepped out. Clara's breath caught. He looked impeccable as always. Charcoal grey suit, crisp white shirt, silver tie that brought out his eyes. But when his gaze found hers across the office, something electric passed between them that made her forget how to breathe. Alexander stopped walking. For several seconds, they simply looked at each other, and Clara was certain everyone in the office could feel the charged energy crackling between them. Then Alexander smiled, not his usual professional nod, but a genuine warm smile that transformed his entire face. "Good morning, Ms. Johnson," he said as he approached her desk, his voice carrying a note of appreciation that made heat bloom in her cheeks. "Good morning, Mr. Walker." She was amazed her voice remained professional when her heart was beating like a hummingbird's wings. "You look..." He paused, seemingly searching for appropriate words in a very public setting. "Well rested." The comment was innocuous enough for their audience, but his eyes told a different story entirely. Clara felt herself blushing. "Thank you, sir. Your Hartwell presentation materials are ready for review." "Excellent." Alexander glanced around the office, noting the curious stares they were attracting. "Could you bring them to my office? I'd like to discuss the strategy." As Clara gathered the presentation files, she was aware of Dahlia and several other colleagues exchanging meaningful looks. The office gossip network would be buzzing within the hour. Inside Alexander's office, he closed the door and turned to face her. The professional mask he wore in public fell away, replaced by something raw and honest. "Clara," he said softly, "you didn't hide." "No," she whispered, "I didn't. How do you feel?" Clara considered the question seriously. "Terrified. Exhilarated. Like I'm walking around without skin." She paused. "Alive." Alexander moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "You were beautiful yesterday and the day before that, and every day for 3 years, but now you're letting the world see it too." Clara's chest tightened with emotion. No one had ever spoken to her like that, with such genuine admiration, such reverence. "Alexander," she began, but he held up a hand. I know this is complicated. I know there are rules about workplace relationships and power dynamics, and a dozen other things that make this inadvisable." His eyes searched her face. "But I also know that what I feel for you, what I suspect you might feel for me, is too important to ignore because of corporate policy." Clara's pulse raced. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'd like to take you to dinner. Not a business dinner, not a corporate obligation. A real date where we can talk without worrying about who's watching or what it means for office politics." The invitation hung between them like a bridge Clara could either cross or burn down. "And if I say yes?" Alexander's smile was soft, hopeful. "Then we figure it out as we go. carefully, professionally, but honestly. Before Clara could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Lydia Pemberton from accounting, the woman whose urgent request had led to Clara working late the night everything changed. "I should take this," Clara said, but Alexander shook his head. "Let it go to voicemail. Lydia's crises can wait 5 minutes." His eyes were intense, focused entirely on her. "This can't." Clara looked at this powerful man who was asking, not demanding, but asking, for a chance to see where their connection might lead. 3 years ago, she would have been terrified of the risk, of the potential for heartbreak or professional disaster. But 3 years ago, she had been a different woman. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, yes, I'll have dinner with you. A real date." Alexander's smile could have powered the entire Manhattan grid. "Saturday night?" "Saturday night." Their phone buzzed simultaneously, Clara's desk line and Alexander's cell. The business day was beginning in earnest, demanding their attention and forcing them back into their professional roles. But as Clara turned toward the door, Alexander caught her hand gently. "Clara, thank you." "For what?" "For being brave enough to let me see you." As Clara returned to her desk, she felt the curious stares of her colleagues, but found that she didn't mind them anymore. Let them wonder. Let them speculate. Let them see that Clara Johnson was no longer hiding. Her phone finally stopped ringing, and the voicemail notification chimed. She listened to Lydia's message about another urgent project that probably wasn't urgent at all, and for the first time in 3 years, Clara smiled as she deleted it without calling back. Some things she was learning were more important than being the perfect invisible employee. Some things were worth stepping into the light for. By Friday afternoon, the entire 42nd floor was buzzing with speculation about Clara Johnson's transformation. Clara could feel the whispered conversations that stopped when she walked by, the lingering glances that followed her movement from the coffee station back to her desk. She'd worn another fitted dress today, deep emerald green that complemented her skin tone, and had caught 3 different colleagues doing double takes when she smiled instead of offering her usual polite nod. "So," Dahlia Martinez said, appearing at Clara's desk with 2 cups of coffee and a mischievous grin, "are we going to talk about the elephant in the room?" Clara looked up from her computer screen, where she'd been reviewing Alexander's schedule for the following week. "What elephant would that be? The one where you've suddenly transformed from Clark Kent into Superman, and our notoriously stone-cold CEO has been staring at you like you hung the moon." Dahlia settled into the chair across from Clara's desk. "Girl, the office pool has you 2 secretly married by Christmas." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. "There's an office pool?" "Honey, there's always an office pool. Last month it was about whether Mr. Walker would actually fire the entire marketing department after the Kellerman disaster." Dahlia leaned forward conspiratorially. "But this week, it's all about you." Clara glanced nervously toward Alexander's office. He was on a conference call with Tokyo, his sleeves rolled up and his brow furrowed in concentration. Even from this distance, she could feel the familiar flutter in her stomach when she looked at him. "There's nothing to speculate about," Clara said carefully. "I'm still his assistant. He's still my boss." "Uh-huh." Dahlia's smile was knowing. "And I'm still pretending that my master's degree in international business qualifies me to fetch coffee for executives who couldn't find Japan on a map without GPS." Before Clara could respond, the elevator chimed and Octavia Sterling stepped out. Clara's stomach dropped. Octavia was everything Clara had spent 3 years trying not to be. Tall, blonde, impeccably dressed, and absolutely stunning. She was also the senior partner at Sterling & Associates, the law firm that handled Walker Industries' most important contracts, and if office gossip was accurate, she'd been trying to catch Alexander's personal attention for over a year. "Well, well," Octavia said, her designer heels clicking across the marble floor as she approached Clara's desk. "Someone's been making changes." Her tone was pleasant enough, but Clara caught the sharp assessment in her ice-blue eyes as they catalogued every detail of Clara's appearance. "Good afternoon, Ms. Sterling," Clara replied professionally. "Mr. Walker is expecting you. He should be finishing his call with Tokyo momentarily." "I'm sure he is." Octavia's smile was perfectly polite and completely predatory. "You know, Clara, may I call you Clara? I have to say, your new look is quite bold." Dahlia made a small noise that sounded suspiciously like a stifled laugh, but Clara kept her expression neutral. "Thank you. It must be liberating, finally deciding to make an effort with your appearance. I imagine it opens up all sorts of new opportunities." The comment hung in the air like poison, sweet-sounding but deadly. Clara felt her carefully constructed confidence wobble for a moment. Then Alexander's office door opened, and he stepped out, still adjusting his tie after his conference call. His eyes immediately found Clara, and the warm smile that spread across his face was so genuine, so unguarded, that several nearby conversations stopped entirely. "Octavia," he said, finally noticing his waiting appointment. "Right on time." "Alexander." Octavia's voice took on a purring quality that made Clara's teeth clench. "You look wonderful. That tie brings out your eyes." Alexander glanced down at his tie, a simple navy blue that Clara had actually complimented that morning, then looked back at Octavia with polite indifference. "Thank you. Shall we discuss the Henderson contracts?" As they disappeared into his office, Clara tried to focus on her work, but Octavia's words kept echoing in her mind, finally deciding to make an effort with your appearance. "Don't let her get to you," Dahlia said softly. "Octavia Sterling has been circling Alexander Walker like a shark for months. She's probably panicking that someone actually caught his attention." "I haven't caught anyone's attention," Clara protested, but even as she said it, she could see Alexander through his office window, gesturing as he explained something to Octavia. When he turned slightly, his eyes found Clara's through the glass, and he offered a small, private smile before returning to his conversation. "Right," Dahlia said dryly. "And I'm the Queen of England." The meeting stretched for over an hour. Clara tried to focus on her work, but she found herself glancing toward Alexander's office more often than she cared to admit. Through the glass, she could see Octavia leaning forward, touching Alexander's arm when she made a point, throwing back her head when she laughed at something he said. When they finally emerged, Octavia was practically glowing with satisfaction. "Alexander, we simply must continue this conversation over dinner. I have some ideas about the international division that I think you'll find stimulating." Her hand lingered on his arm as she spoke. Clara's stomach clenched, but Alexander stepped back slightly, creating distance between them. "I appreciate the offer, Octavia, but I have other commitments this weekend." Octavia's smile faltered for just a moment. "Of course. Perhaps next week? Perhaps. Ms. Johnson will coordinate our schedules." Alexander's tone was professionally polite but decidedly cool. After Octavia left, Alexander approached Clara's desk. "Could you step into my office for a moment? I need to discuss the Henderson timeline." Inside his office with the door closed, Alexander's professional mask dropped completely. "Are you all right?" he asked, moving closer. "You seem tense." Clara looked up at him, this powerful man who somehow always seemed to know when something was bothering her. "It's nothing, just office dynamics." "Octavia," it wasn't a question. "She made some comments about my new look." Clara tried to keep her voice light, but Alexander's expression darkened. "What kind of comments?" "Nothing overt, just," Clara shrugged, "implications that I'm suddenly making an effort to get attention." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight with controlled anger. "Clara, look at me." She met his eyes, and the intensity there took her breath away. "You are brilliant, beautiful, and remarkable, not because of what you wear or how you style your hair, but because of who you are. Anyone who tries to diminish that is threatened by your light, not concerned about your choices." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm making a mistake, if I should just go back to being invisible." "Hey," Alexander's voice was gentle as he reached out to touch her cheek. "The only mistake would be dimming your light, because others can't handle its brightness." The tenderness in his voice, the way he looked at her like she was precious, made Clara's heart race. "Besides," Alexander added, his smile turning playful, "I have a selfish interest in you, staying exactly as radiant as you are. I have a date with you tomorrow night, and I plan to be the proudest man in whatever restaurant we choose." Clara laughed despite her emotional turmoil. "You haven't even told me where we're going." "That," Alexander said, his eyes twinkling, "is because it's a surprise. But I will say this, wear something that makes you feel as beautiful as you are." As Clara returned to her desk, she realized that Octavia Sterling's attempt to undermine her confidence had backfired spectacularly. Instead of making her retreat, it had reminded her why she'd decided to step into the light in the first place. Some women try to tear others down to elevate themselves, but some women, the ones worth knowing, lifted each other up. And tomorrow night, Clara Johnson was going to discover exactly what kind of woman she wanted to be when the man she was falling for looked at her like she was the most remarkable person in his world. Because for the first time in her life, She was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was. Clara had changed outfits 4 times before settling on the midnight blue dress that made her feel like she was wearing confidence itself. "You're glowing," Damon observed from the doorway of her bedroom, grinning as he watched her apply a final touch of lipstick. "Like, literally glowing. It's kind of freaking me out." "I'm not glowing," Clara protested, but she caught her reflection in the mirror and had to admit her brother might be right. There was something radiant about her tonight, a warmth that seemed to emanate from within. And this mysterious date you won't tell me about has nothing to do with it?" Damon leaned against the doorframe, studying her with the protective older brother expression that had appeared the moment she'd mentioned going out tonight. "It's just dinner, Damon. With someone who makes you hum unconsciously and spend 3 hours getting ready for just dinner." His voice was teasing, but his eyes were serious. "Clara, you know I trust your judgment, but you're going to worry anyway because that's what big brothers do," Clara finished, turning to face him. "I know, and I love you for it, but I'm 26, not 16. I can handle one dinner date." Damon was quiet for a moment, then his expression softened. "You look happy, sis. Really happy. I haven't seen you like this, maybe ever." Before Clara could respond, her phone buzzed with a text. "Byron is downstairs whenever you're ready. No rush. A." The thoughtfulness of the message, letting her know she wasn't being rushed, signing it with just his initial like a secret, made her heart skip. "That's my ride," she said, grabbing her small black purse and the wrap she'd borrowed from her neighbor. "Your ride has a name, right?" Damon called after her as she headed for the door. Clara paused, turned back and smiled. "His name is Alexander, and Damon, I think you're going to like him." The Mercedes was waiting at the curb, Byron behind the wheel with his usual kind smile. But as Clara approached the car, the rear door opened and Alexander stepped out. He looked devastating in a perfectly tailored black suit with a deep blue shirt that matched her dress exactly, a coincidence that made her wonder if he'd somehow planned it. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and when he smiled at her, Clara felt her knees go weak. "You look breathtaking," he said simply, offering his arm as he escorted her to the car. "Thank you," Clara managed, acutely aware of how his cologne made her want to move closer, how the warmth of his arm beneath her fingers sent electricity through her entire body. As Byron pulled away from her building, Alexander turned to face her. "I have a confession." "Oh? I was terrified you'd change your mind." Clara blinked in surprise. "Why would you think that?" "Because I spent most of yesterday second-guessing myself, wondering if I was being presumptuous, if I was taking advantage of my position, if you might have agreed just because I'm your boss." Alexander's honesty was disarming. "I kept thinking you deserved better than some powerful man who was too blind to see you until you practically hit him over the head with your brilliance." "Alexander," Clara's voice was soft. "I didn't say yes because you're my boss. I said yes despite it." The relief that washed over his face was so genuine that Clara felt her last remaining walls crumble. This wasn't the intimidating CEO who commanded boardrooms. This was just a man, nervous about a first date with a woman he cared about. "Where are we going?" she asked as they crossed into Manhattan. "Somewhere I hope you'll find as special as I do." 20 minutes later, Byron pulled up to a small intimate restaurant in Soho that Clara had never heard of, despite living in New York for years. The facade was understated, warm brick with soft lighting spilling from tall windows. A discreet sign read, "Celeste's." "It doesn't look like much from the outside," Alexander said as he helped her from the car, "but it serves the best French cuisine in the city. More importantly, it's quiet enough for real conversation." Inside, Clara understood immediately why Alexander had chosen this place. The restaurant was elegant without being ostentatious. Maybe 20 tables, soft jazz playing in the background, candles casting dancing shadows on exposed brick walls. It felt intimate, romantic, like a secret shared between lovers. The maître d' greeted Alexander by name and led them to a corner table that offered both privacy and a view of the softly lit dining room. "This is beautiful," Clara said as Alexander held her chair. "Not as beautiful as you," he replied, and the sincerity in his voice made her blush. As they settled into their seats, Clara realized she felt more nervous now than she had during the corporate dinner. This was different, personal, intimate, real. There were no business contracts to discuss, no professional masks to maintain. Just Alexander and Clara, discovering who they were when everything else fell away. "Tell me something I don't know about you," Alexander said after they'd ordered wine. Clara considered the question. "I wanted to be a teacher when I was little. Elementary school specifically. I used to line up my stuffed animals and teach them multiplication tables. Alexander's smile was warm. What changed your mind? Reality. Teachers don't make enough money to pay off student loans and help support family members. Clara shrugged. So I found other ways to help people learn and grow. Is that what you do? Help people learn and grow? In a way, I help brilliant executives like you organize your thoughts and present them clearly. I help complex deals come together by managing the details others overlook. I help companies avoid costly mistakes by catching errors before they become problems. Clara paused, surprised by her own words. I never thought about it like that before. You should, Alexander said quietly. You should think about it exactly like that. Their conversation flowed as easily as the wine. Alexander told her about growing up in Connecticut, about the pressure of inheriting a business empire he'd never asked for, about his complicated relationship with a father who'd valued profit over people. Clara shared stories about helping Damon through college, about their mother's strength in raising 2 children alone, about the small moments of joy she found in organizing chaos into clarity. Can I ask you something personal? Alexander said as they shared dessert, a decadent chocolate souffle that Clara had initially protested ordering. More personal than everything we've already discussed? Much more personal. His eyes grew serious. Are you happy, Clara? Not content, not satisfied, happy? The question caught her off guard. She set down her spoon and really considered it. I'm becoming happy, she said finally. For the first time in my adult life, I feel like I'm becoming the person I was meant to be instead of the person I thought I had to be. And what's the difference? Clara looked across the table at this man who asked the right questions, who listened to her answers like they mattered, who looked at her like she was remarkable. The person I thought I had to be was invisible, safe, careful, never to want too much or reach too high. The person I'm becoming wants things. Big, scary, wonderful things. She takes risks. She believes she deserves good things. Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. She believes she deserves to be loved. Alexander reached across the table and took her hand. She's right. The simple words carried so much weight, so much promise, that Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. Alexander, what are we doing here? Really? Honestly? I think we're falling in love. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. And it terrifies me because I've never felt anything like this before. And it thrills me because I never thought I could feel anything like this at all. Clara's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. We barely know each other. I've watched you work for 3 years. I've seen how you treat people when you think no one is looking. I've witnessed your kindness, your intelligence, your strength. I may not know your favorite color or whether you prefer mountains or beaches, but Clara, I know your heart, and it's extraordinary. Before Clara could respond, Alexander signaled for the check. Let's get out of here. There's somewhere else I want to take you. 20 minutes later, they stood on the observation deck of the Empire State Building. The city spread out below them like a glittering carpet. The late evening air was cool, and Alexander had draped his jacket around Clara's shoulders without being asked. Mountains or beaches? He asked, standing behind her with his hands resting lightly on her arms. What? Earlier you said I didn't know if you preferred mountains or beaches, so I'm asking. Clara leaned back against his chest, feeling his warmth, his strength, his steady heartbeat. Mountains. I like the way they make you feel small and infinite at the same time. Favorite color? Deep blue, like the ocean just before a storm. Coffee or tea? Coffee in the morning. Tea when I'm thinking. Thinking about what? Clara turned in his arms, looking up at his face illuminated by the city lights. Tonight? Thinking about whether this is really happening or if I'm going to wake up tomorrow and discover I dreamed the whole thing. Alexander's smile was soft, tender. It's really happening. And then he was kissing her. Soft and sweet and perfect, with the entire city of New York as their witness. Clara felt herself melt into him, felt 3 years of careful distance dissolve in the space of a heartbeat. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. Clara Johnson, he whispered, you are going to change my entire world. Is that a promise? She whispered back. It's a fact. As they stood there, wrapped in each other and the magic of the moment, Clara realized that Octavia Sterling had been wrong about one thing. She hadn't changed her appearance to get attention. She'd changed her life to make room for love. And love, she was discovering, looked exactly like Alexander Walker's smile in the moonlight. Clara woke up Monday morning with Alexander's goodbye kiss still tingling on her lips and the certainty that everything was about to change. They'd spent Sunday together, a lazy afternoon in Central Park, dinner at a tiny Italian place in the village, hours of conversation that flowed like wine. But now, standing in front of her bathroom mirror at 6:45 a.m., reality was setting in with the force of a cold shower. How exactly did one navigate being in love with their boss? Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Good morning, beautiful. Looking forward to seeing you today. A." The message made her smile despite her anxiety. Even in text form, he managed to be both personal and appropriately vague in case anyone else saw it. She selected a burgundy wrap dress that made her feel confident but professional, let her hair fall in soft waves, and applied just enough makeup to highlight her natural features. The woman in the mirror looked happy, radiant even, but Clara wondered if everyone would be able to read the change written across her face. The subway ride to Manhattan felt different today. Not nervous different like last week, but charged with possibility. Clara found herself smiling at strangers, humming softly under her breath, radiating the kind of joy that came from being thoroughly, completely happy. But the moment she stepped off the elevator onto the 42nd floor, she sensed trouble. Conversations stopped abruptly when she appeared. Dalia Martinez shot her a warning look from across the room. And standing near the reception desk, looking like she'd been waiting for exactly this moment, was Octavia Sterling. At 8:15 a.m., 30 minutes before the office officially opened. "Clara," Octavia's voice carried across the nearly empty floor with theatrical surprise. "How lovely to see you. You look absolutely glowing this morning." Clara's stomach clenched. "Good morning, Ms. Sterling. You're here early." "Last-minute contract revisions," Octavia said smoothly, moving closer. "I hope you had a pleasant weekend." The question sounded innocent enough, but Clara caught the sharp calculation in Octavia's ice-blue eyes. "Yes, thank you. Very relaxing." "How wonderful. I imagine New York offers so many opportunities for relaxation. The restaurants alone, Le Bernardin, Celeste's, all those charming little places in Soho." Clara's blood went cold. Celeste's wasn't well known enough to mention casually. Octavia had to have seen them there, or had someone else see them. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Their private, perfect evening hadn't been as private as they'd thought. "I wouldn't know," Clara said carefully. "I don't get out much." "Oh, I'm sure you don't." Octavia's smile was razor-sharp. "Though I did think I caught a glimpse of someone who looked remarkably like you on Saturday evening. Stunning dress, by the way. Midnight blue is definitely your color." Before Clara could respond, Alexander's private elevator chimed, and he stepped out looking devastatingly handsome in a charcoal suit. His eyes immediately sought Clara's, and the warm smile that spread across his face was so genuine, so unguarded, that several nearby staff members turned to follow his gaze. Then he noticed Octavia, and his expression shifted to professional courtesy. "Octavia, you're here early." "Contract revisions," she said, but her attention was focused on the way Alexander's gaze kept drifting back to Clara. "I was just telling Clara how lovely she looks this morning, positively radiant. Wouldn't you agree?" Alexander's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ms. Johnson always looks professional." "Professional, yes, but there's something else, isn't there? Something that suggests she had a particularly enlightening weekend." The threat in Octavia's voice was subtle but unmistakable. Clara felt panic rising in her chest. If Octavia made their relationship public before they'd figured out how to handle it professionally, it could destroy everything: Alexander's reputation, her job, their future. "Octavia," Alexander's voice carried the edge of steel that made board members tremble. "Perhaps we should discuss those contract revisions in my office." "Of course." But as Octavia gathered her briefcase, she turned back to Clara with a smile that was pure venom. "Clara, we should have coffee sometime. I'd love to hear about your career development strategies." The moment they disappeared into Alexander's office, Dahlia appeared at Clara's desk like a concerned fairy godmother. "Okay, spill. What was that about?" "I think Octavia Sterling saw me somewhere she shouldn't have," Clara said quietly, sinking into her chair. "Saw you where and with whom?" Dahlia's eyes widened. "Oh my God, Clara, please tell me you're not involved with a married man or something equally catastrophic." "It's not catastrophic," Clara said, but her voice lacked conviction. "At least, I didn't think it was." Through Alexander's office window, she could see him and Octavia in what appeared to be an intense conversation. Octavia was leaning forward, speaking animatedly, while Alexander sat rigid in his chair, his face a mask of controlled fury. Clara's phone rang, startling her from her surveillance. The caller ID showed her mother's number. "Hi, Mama. Clara, baby. I need to talk to you about something." Her mother's voice carried a note of worry that immediately got Clara's attention. "I got a call this morning from someone asking questions about you." Clara's heart stopped. "What kind of questions?" "Personal questions about your job, your living situation, whether you were dating anyone. She said she was doing a background check for a promotion you were up for, but something felt off about it." "What did you tell her?" "Nothing, of course. I told her to call you directly if she needed information." "But Clara, who would be investigating you for a promotion? And why wouldn't you have mentioned it?" Clara glanced toward Alexander's office, where the conversation was becoming more animated. "Mama, I need to call you back." She hung up just as Alexander's office door opened. Octavia emerged, looking satisfied, while Alexander followed with his face set in hard lines. "Clara," Alexander said, his voice carefully neutral, "could you clear my schedule for the next hour? I need to make some calls." "Of course, Mr. Walker." Octavia paused at Clara's desk, her smile triumphant. "Such a pleasure chatting with you, Clara. I'm sure we'll be talking again very soon." After Octavia left, Clara sat frozen at her desk, her mind racing. The pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. Octavia hadn't just seen them at dinner. She'd done research, made calls, built a case, and now she had ammunition to use against both of them. Alexander appeared at her desk, his expression grim. "We need to talk, but not here. Alexander, my mother got a call." "I know. Octavia just informed me of her concerns about our professional relationship." His voice was tight with controlled anger. "She's threatening to file a complaint with the board about inappropriate workplace conduct." Clara felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "What does that mean?" "It means," Alexander said quietly, "that we have a choice to make, and we need to make it quickly." Before Clara could ask what kind of choice, Lydia Pemberton from accounting appeared at her desk with a stack of papers and a sly smile. "Clara, I need these expense reports processed immediately, and I'll need you to stay late tonight to finish them. Mr. Walker specifically requested they be completed today." Clara looked at the reports, routine quarterly summaries that weren't due for another week. Then at Lydia's smug expression. Word was spreading through the office faster than wildfire, and suddenly everyone wanted to test the new dynamic between Alexander and his assistant. "Actually," Alexander said, his voice carrying the authority that could silence entire boardrooms, "Ms. Johnson will be unavailable for overtime today. The reports can wait until their actual due date." Lydia's smile faltered. "But sir, I thought—" "You thought incorrectly." Alexander's grey eyes were ice cold. "Ms. Johnson's schedule goes through me, not through other departments looking to manufacture urgency." As Lydia retreated with her tail between her legs, Clara realized that Alexander had just publicly chosen her side. But instead of feeling relieved, she felt terrified, because in protecting her, he'd made their relationship even more obvious to everyone watching. And in a building full of ambitious people looking for leverage, obvious was dangerous. "Alexander," she whispered, "what are we going to do?" His eyes met hers, and in them she saw determination, fear, and something that looked like love preparing to fight for its life. "We're going to figure it out," he said quietly, "together." But as Clara looked around the office at the curious stares and whispered conversations, she wondered if love would be enough to survive what was coming, because Octavia Sterling had just declared war, and Clara Johnson was about to discover whether she was strong enough to fight for the happiness she'd only just learned to believe she deserved. At 7:30 p.m., Clara found herself standing in the rain outside a small cafe in Greenwich Village, her heart hammering against her ribs. Alexander had texted her an address and a simple message: "We need to talk away from the office. Please come." The urgency in those few words had sent ice through her veins. Whatever conversation they were about to have, it was the kind that could change everything. She pushed through the cafe's glass door, shaking raindrops from her coat. The place was warm and dimly lit, with mismatched furniture and the comforting smell of coffee and pastries. Alexander sat in a corner booth, still wearing his suit but with his tie loosened, and his usual perfect composure cracked around the edges. When he saw her, relief flooded his face. "Thank you for coming." Clara slid into the booth across from him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were clenched on the table. "Alexander, you're scaring me. What happened after I left the office?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his untouched coffee cup. When he finally looked up, his grey eyes were filled with something that looked dangerously like defeat. "Octavia called an emergency meeting with the board." Clara's stomach dropped. "When?" "An hour ago. She presented them with photos from Saturday night. Us at Celeste's on the observation deck, kissing. Alexander's voice was flat, professional, but Clara caught the tremor underneath. She also had documentation of the background check she ran on your family, your financial situation, your brother's college tuition. Why would she investigate my family? To build a case that you're using our relationship for financial gain, that I'm being manipulated by someone in a vulnerable position. Alexander's jaw clenched. She painted you as a gold digger and me as a fool. Clara felt like she'd been slapped. And what did the board say? They gave me an ultimatum. Alexander met her eyes, and Clara saw the pain there. End the relationship immediately and publicly reprimand you for unprofessional conduct, or they'll launch a formal investigation that could result in both of us being terminated. The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Clara felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. How long do you have to decide? 24 hours. Clara nodded, trying to process the magnitude of what they were facing. Alexander, I need to tell you something. What? I'm going to make this easy for you. Her voice was steady despite the way her heart was breaking. I'll resign. Tonight. Submit my letter first thing in the morning, clean out my desk, and disappear from your life. Problem solved. Clara, no. Yes. She leaned forward, her voice gaining strength. This is my fault. I should never have let this happen. I knew the risks, I knew the complications, and I let myself believe that what we felt was worth destroying your career. Our careers, Alexander corrected fiercely, and what we feel is worth fighting for. Is it? Clara's laugh was hollow. Look at what's happened in one day, Alexander. Octavia has turned our love into a weapon against us. She's making me look like exactly what I spent 3 years proving I'm not. Someone who uses her position to get ahead. Alexander reached across the table and grabbed her hands. You are brilliant, ethical, and honorable. Anyone who can't see that is blind. The board doesn't see that. They see a secretary who got above herself and a CEO who let his personal feelings compromise his judgment. Clara pulled her hands free, needing the distance to say what came next. Maybe they're right. Don't you dare! Alexander's voice was sharp with anger. Don't you dare let Octavia Sterling make you doubt who you are. Who am I, Alexander? Clara's voice cracked. A week ago I was invisible, safe. No one questioned my competence or my motives because no one cared enough to look twice. But the moment I stepped into the light, the moment I let myself want something more than just surviving, you became a target. Alexander's expression was grim. I know. And I hate that loving me put you in this position. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Clara felt fresh tears threaten. I love you too, she whispered. That's why I have to go. No. Alexander's voice was firm, decided. There's another option. Clara looked at him questioningly. I resign. What? Clara's voice came out as a squeak. Alexander, you can't be serious. Walker Industries is your family's legacy. It's everything you've worked for. It's a business, Clara. A very successful business that will survive perfectly well under new leadership. Alexander's eyes were intense, focused entirely on her. But there's only one you, and I'm not losing you to corporate politics and petty jealousy. Clara stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. You would give up everything? For me? I would give up everything except you. His voice was quiet but certain. Clara, what if we both resigned? What if we took the choice away from them entirely? And do what? We both need jobs, Alexander. I have student loans, my mother's medical bills, Damon's tuition. Theodore Ashworth offered you a position at Meridian Industries last week, remember? Alexander leaned forward, warming to his theme. And I've been getting offers from headhunters for years. We don't have to let them destroy us. We can choose our own future. Clara felt a flutter of hope, quickly followed by terror. That's incredibly risky. So is love. Alexander's smile was soft, vulnerable. Clara, 3 days ago, you told me you were tired of being invisible. Well, I'm tired of being trapped in a life that doesn't leave room for the things that matter most. Before Clara could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Damon. Emergency. Can you come home? Mum's in the hospital. Clara's face went white as she read the message. I have to go. My mother. I'll drive you, Alexander said immediately, already standing and throwing money on the table. No, you don't understand. Clara. His voice was gentle but firm. Whatever's happening with your family, you don't have to face it alone anymore. The 20-minute drive to Queens passed in tense silence. Clara's mind raced between worry for her mother and the impossible choices they'd been discussing. When they arrived at the modest apartment building, Damon was waiting outside, pacing. What happened? Clara asked, rushing to her brother. She collapsed at work. They think it's stress-related, but they're running tests. Damon's eyes were red with worry. Clara, the medical bills alone are going to bankrupt us, and if she can't work, we'll figure it out, Clara said automatically, but her voice lacked conviction. How could they figure it out when she might not have a job tomorrow? Alexander stepped forward, extending his hand to Damon. You must be Clara's brother. I'm Alexander Walker. Damon's eyes widened with recognition, then narrowed with suspicion. You're her boss. Among other things, Alexander replied diplomatically. Which hospital is your mother at? As they drove to the hospital, Clara sat in the back seat with Damon, while Alexander navigated traffic with focused efficiency. At a red light, their eyes met in the rearview mirror. We'll continue our conversation later, Alexander said quietly. Family first. But Clara knew that their conversation was academic now. Whatever dreams they'd been building together, whatever future they'd imagined, her mother's collapse had brought reality crashing back. She couldn't afford to take risks with her career when her family needed her stability. Love, she realized, was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not when the people she loved most were counting on her to be practical, reliable, invisible Clara Johnson, the woman who always chose duty over desire, even when it broke her heart. Clara stood outside the Walker Industries boardroom at 10:30 a.m. Tuesday morning, her resignation letter folded in her trembling hands. Her mother was stable, exhausted and overwhelmed, but stable. The doctors had confirmed it was stress-related, exacerbated by working 2 jobs while trying to hide her financial struggles from her children. The medical bills would be substantial, but manageable, if Clara kept her current salary and benefits. If she had any salary and benefits after the next 10 minutes, through the frosted glass doors, she could see the silhouettes of the board members seated around the massive conference table. Alexander sat at the head, his posture rigid, facing questions she couldn't hear but could imagine. Clara had been summoned to provide her perspective on the situation, which everyone knew was corporate speak for defend yourself before we destroy your career. She'd spent the night crafting her resignation letter, each word carefully chosen to protect Alexander, while accepting full blame for their inappropriate relationship. It was the safe choice, the invisible choice, the Clara Johnson choice. But as she stood there, remembering her mother's words from the hospital bed the night before, doubt crept in. Baby, her mother had whispered, squeezing Clara's hand with surprising strength. I didn't raise you to play small. I raised you to be brave enough to claim the life you deserve. The boardroom door opened, and Wesley Carmichael, the board's chairman, appeared. He was a distinguished man in his 70s with silver hair and the kind of presence that came from decades of making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Ms. Johnson, please, come in. Clara's heels clicked against the polished floor as she entered the room. The board members, 7 successful, powerful people who held her future in their hands, watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Alexander's eyes met hers across the room, and she saw everything there: love, regret, determination, and something that looked like pride. He'd dressed for battle in his finest suit, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set against whatever they'd been discussing. Ms. Johnson, Wesley said, gesturing to the chair across from Alexander, please have a seat. We'd like to hear your version of recent events. Clara remained standing, her resignation letter still clutched in her hand. Before you ask any questions, I have something to say. Murmurs rippled around the table, but Wesley nodded. Proceed. Clara looked around the room, at these people who held so much power, and realized something profound. She wasn't afraid of them anymore. 3 years ago, you hired me as Alexander Walker's executive assistant. In that time, I have managed his schedule, organized his contracts, coordinated international deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and ensured that this company ran smoothly behind the scenes. Clara's voice was steady, clear. I have never missed a deadline, never made an error that cost this company money, and never once used my position for personal gain. Ms. Johnson, interrupted Penelope Ashford, a sharp-featured woman with steel-grey hair. We're not questioning your professional competence. We're questioning your judgment in pursuing a romantic relationship with your direct supervisor. You're right, Clara said simply. My judgment was questionable, but not in the way you think. Alexander leaned forward, clearly surprised by her response. My questionable judgment, Clara continued, was in believing that I had to choose between being professional and being human. For 3 years, I made myself invisible, because I thought that was what success looked like for someone like me. I hid my intelligence, my personality, my dreams, everything that made me who I am because I was afraid that being seen would make me a target. She turned slightly to look at Alexander. I was right to be afraid. The moment I stopped hiding, I became exactly the kind of target I'd spent years avoiding. But here's what I learned. Being invisible doesn't make you safe. It just makes you disappear. Ms. Johnson, Wesley said gently, what exactly are you telling us? Clara straightened her shoulders and looked him directly in the eye. I'm telling you that Alexander Walker is the most ethical, principled, honorable man I've ever worked with. He never once treated me as anything other than a valued colleague until I made the choice, my choice, to let him see who I really was. When he fell in love with me, it wasn't because I was his subordinate. It was despite the fact that I was his subordinate. That's a very touching sentiment, Penelope said coldly, but it doesn't change the fact that workplace relationships between supervisors and their direct reports create liability issues for this company. You're absolutely right, Clara agreed, which is why I'm prepared to transfer to another department. Theodore Ashworth at Meridian Industries has offered me a position as senior contract analyst. I'm qualified for the role, it's a significant advancement in my career, and it removes any conflict of interest. The room fell silent. Clara could see the board members exchanging glances, recalculating their position. However, Clara continued, and her voice took on a harder edge, I want to address the accusations that have been made against my character. She pulled a folder from her purse and placed it on the conference table. Yesterday, Octavia Sterling implied that I was using my relationship with Alexander for financial gain. She presented evidence of my family's financial struggles as proof that I was motivated by money rather than genuine affection. Clara opened the folder and spread out documents across the table. These are my financial records for the past 3 years. Bank statements, tax returns, student loan payments, family support. You'll notice that my salary has gone into 2 places, essential expenses and helping my family. I have never asked Alexander for money, gifts, or special treatment. The only thing I ever accepted from him was respect. Alexander was staring at her with something approaching awe, but Clara wasn't finished. More importantly, I want you to understand what Octavia Sterling's investigation reveals about this company's culture. She hired a private investigator to dig into my personal life, contacted my family members under false pretenses, and built a case designed to destroy my reputation, all because she saw me as competition for Alexander's attention. Clara paused, letting that sink in. If this is how Walker Industries handles workplace conflicts, with intimidation, investigation, and character assassination, then maybe the problem isn't my relationship with Alexander. Maybe the problem is that this company allows certain people to weaponize personal vendettas under the guise of corporate policy. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara could see several board members shifting uncomfortably, clearly recognizing the implications of what she'd said. Wesley cleared his throat. Ms. Johnson, are you suggesting that Ms. Sterling's actions were inappropriate? I'm suggesting that her actions reveal a pattern of behavior that should concern you more than 2 people falling in love. Clara's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. Alexander Walker has increased this company's revenue by 40% in 3 years. He's ethical, visionary, and completely dedicated to Walker Industries' success. If you fire him because he fell in love with a woman who happens to work for him, you're not protecting the company. You're letting personal politics destroy one of your most valuable assets. She looked around the table one final time. And if you allow Octavia Sterling's tactics to succeed, you're sending a message to every woman in this company that she can be destroyed the moment someone decides she's gotten too confident, too visible, or too threatening to the status quo. Clara placed her resignation letter on the table, but left it folded. This is my resignation, effective immediately, if you decide that my relationship with Alexander is more important than my professional contributions. But I want you to know that I'm not resigning because I'm ashamed of loving him. I'm resigning because I refuse to let my presence here hurt the man I love or compromise the company we both care about. She turned to Alexander, her eyes bright with unshed tears but her voice strong. Alexander, what we have is real. It's complicated and inconvenient and probably inadvisable from a corporate standpoint, but it's real. And I'm tired of pretending that real love is something to be ashamed of. The room was absolutely silent as Clara walked toward the door, but just as she reached for the handle, Wesley's voice stopped her. Ms. Johnson. She turned back. Sit down, please. Clara hesitated, then returned to her chair. The board members were conferring in whispered conversations, but Wesley's attention was focused entirely on her. "In 40 years of corporate leadership," he said slowly, "I have rarely heard someone defend their principles with such clarity and courage. Your points about Ms. Sterling's behavior are well taken, and your proposed solution demonstrates exactly the kind of strategic thinking this company values." He looked at Alexander, then back at Clara. "If Meridian Industries is truly offering you a senior analyst position, and if you're genuinely interested in pursuing it, then Walker Industries would be foolish to stand in your way. In fact, given our ongoing partnership with Meridian, having someone of your caliber working there could benefit both companies." Clara's heart began to race. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that love is not a corporate liability when it's handled with integrity and professionalism, which, from everything I've observed today, it has been." Wesley smiled. "Ms. Johnson, I think you've found a solution that serves everyone's interests." Alexander was looking at her like she'd just moved mountains. "Clara, you're brilliant. We'll need to be careful about appearances during the transition," Wesley continued. "No public displays of affection in the office, discreet communication, that sort of thing. But if you can maintain professional boundaries during your remaining time here, I see no reason why your relationship should be anyone's business but your own." Clara felt tears of relief beginning to fall. "Thank you. Don't thank me. You fought for yourself, and you won." Wesley's eyes twinkled. "Though I do have one question." "Yes? Are you actually happy, Ms. Johnson? Because that's what matters most in the end." Clara looked across the table at Alexander, who was watching her with such love and admiration that she felt her heart might burst. "Yes," she said softly, "I'm happy." And for the first time in her adult life, Clara Johnson meant it completely. 6 months later, the autumn sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Clara's corner office at Meridian Industries, casting golden light across the contract proposals scattered on her mahogany desk. Senior Contract Analyst. The nameplate still made her smile every time she saw it. Clara leaned back in her leather chair, a far cry from the modest station outside Alexander's office, where she'd spent 3 years making herself invisible. From here, on the 38th floor, she could see Walker Industries building across the Manhattan skyline, its glass facade glinting in the afternoon light. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "How's my brilliant girlfriend handling the Morrison acquisition?" She typed back. "Your brilliant girlfriend just saved Meridian $3 million by catching a clause their legal team missed. Dinner at 7. You're extraordinary. Yes to dinner, but I'm cooking. Your brother's joining us. Something about needing relationship advice." Clara laughed, shaking her head. Damon had been skeptical of Alexander at first, but 6 months of watching him treat Clara like she hung the stars had won him over completely. Now, her 22-year-old brother regularly sought relationship counseling from the man who'd once intimidated Fortune 500 CEOs. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Theodore Ashworth entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the satisfied smile of a CEO whose gamble had paid off spectacularly. "Thought you might need caffeine. The Morrison people are singing your praises. Apparently you caught something their entire legal team missed." "Just fresh eyes on old problems," Clara replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Sometimes being the outsider is an advantage." "Sometimes being brilliant is an advantage," Theodore corrected. "Clara, I have a proposition for you." Clara raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "The Singapore office needs a director of international contracts. It's a significant promotion. You'd be overseeing all of our Asian-Pacific deals, managing a team of 12 analysts and working directly with government liaisons." Theodore paused. "It's also a chance to build something from the ground up." Clara's pulse quickened. 6 months ago, the offer would have been unthinkable, both the position itself and her confidence that she could handle it. "That sounds incredible, but you're wondering about Alexander. We just figured out how to make this work. Long distance would be—" "Who said anything about long distance?" Theodore's smile was mysterious. "Walker Industries has been discussing opening an Asian office for years. I happen to know Alexander's been looking for the right opportunity to expand internationally." Clara stared at him. "Theodore, what are you plotting?" "Nothing. Everything. The kind of opportunity that comes along once in a lifetime for people brave enough to take it." He set down his coffee cup. "Think about it, but don't think too long. Singapore waits for no one." After Theodore left, Clara sat in her office watching the city bustle below, her mind racing. 6 months ago, she'd been afraid to wear her hair down to work. Now she was being offered the chance to run international operations on the other side of the world. The woman she'd been would have been terrified of such a dramatic change. The woman she'd become was exhilarated by the possibilities. At 7 p.m. sharp, Clara knocked on the door of Alexander's penthouse apartment in Upper East Side. He'd moved out of the stark, cold place he'd lived in before, choosing something warmer, more inviting, more like a home where laughter was welcome. "It's open," came his voice from the kitchen. Clara entered to find Alexander at the stove, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly mussed, stirring something that smelled incredible. Damon was perched on a bar stool, gesturing animatedly as he told some story that had Alexander laughing. "There she is," Alexander said, turning to kiss her cheek. "The woman who just became a legend at Meridian Industries." "Hardly," Clara protested, but she was glowing from his praise. "Damon, what's this about needing relationship advice?" Her brother grinned sheepishly. "There's this girl in my engineering program, Lucia. She's incredible, brilliant, funny, beautiful. But I think she's out of my league." "Why?" Clara asked, settling onto the stool beside him. "Because she's already published 2 papers on sustainable energy, speaks 4 languages, and yesterday she fixed a problem with our group project that had me stumped for weeks." Damon shook his head. "She's extraordinary. I'm just me." Clara and Alexander exchanged a look, the kind of silent communication that had developed between them over months of learning each other's thoughts. "Damon," Clara said gently, "what makes you think extraordinary women don't want to be with men who appreciate their extraordinariness?" I don't want her to think I'm intimidated by how smart she is." "Then don't be intimidated," Alexander said, plating their dinner. "Be amazed, there's a difference." "What do you mean?" Alexander looked at Clara, his eyes warm with affection. "When someone remarkable lets you see who they really are, you have 2 choices. You can be intimidated by their light, or you can be grateful that they're sharing it with you." Clara felt her heart flutter the way it did every time Alexander looked at her, like she was the most wonderful surprise of his life. "The question isn't whether you're good enough for her," Clara added. "The question is whether you're brave enough to show her who you really are. Because extraordinary women don't fall for perfection, Damon. We fall for authenticity." As they shared dinner, Clara found herself studying the 2 most important men in her life. Damon growing into the confident, principled man she'd always known he could become. Alexander, relaxed and happy in a way that would have been unimaginable a year ago. And herself, sitting in a beautiful apartment, discussing international career opportunities and her brother's love life with equal excitement, no longer afraid to take up space in the world. After dinner, as Damon left for his study group, with considerably more confidence about approaching Lucia, Alexander and Clara stood on his balcony overlooking Central Park. "Theodore made me an interesting offer today," Clara said, leaning against the railing. "Singapore?" Clara turned to stare at him. "How did you—" "Because Theodore Ashworth is many things, but subtle isn't one of them. He's been dropping hints for weeks about exciting opportunities for power couples willing to take risks." Alexander's smile was amused. "Also, I may have mentioned to him that I've been researching Asian markets. Alexander Walker, have you been plotting behind my back?" "I've been hoping," he corrected. "There's a difference." Clara was quiet for a moment, looking out over the city that had become home, thinking about the woman she'd been when she first arrived here 7 years ago, scared, defensive, determined to make herself small enough to survive. "Are you interested?" she asked. "Really? Clara, 6 months ago I was prepared to give up everything for the chance to build a life with you. You think I'd hesitate to relocate for the chance to build an empire with you?" She turned to face him fully. "It would be a big risk. The biggest risks lead to the biggest rewards." Alexander reached for her hands. "Besides, I'm not worried. I'll be working with the woman who convinced a boardroom full of skeptical executives to let her rewrite the rules of corporate romance." Clara laughed. "When you put it like that, is that a yes?" "It's a, let's talk seriously about the logistics and timeline and what we'd be giving up and what we'd be gaining." Very analytical. Very you. Alexander's eyes sparkled. "I love your mind, Clara Johnson. Just my mind, among other things." He pulled her closer. "Your courage, your heart, your terrible habit of humming when you're happy. The way you make me want to be better than I ever thought I could be." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes, not of sadness but of overwhelming gratitude for this life she'd been brave enough to claim. "Alexander, Ask me again in 6 months if I'm happy." "Why 6 months?" Clara smiled, thinking of Singapore, of new challenges, of the adventure waiting for them on the other side of the world, because I have a feeling the answer is only going to get better. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms with the city sparkling below them, Clara thought about the woman who used to hide behind oversized glasses and shapeless blazers. That woman had been surviving, but she hadn't been living. This woman, confident, loved, and ready to take on the world, this woman was finally completely, radiantly alive. And the best part? This was only the beginning, the end. Would you have made the same choice Clara did, fighting for love instead of choosing safety? What did this story teach you about the courage it takes to step into your own light? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.